It is currently almost midnight, and even a detective needs to put down her coat. And that's why it's time for Zip Files After Dark. Recently, I've been on a journey to read romance novels to learn more about myself. What do I want in relationships? What lessons can I learn about relationships from romance novels? Now, some might say that's a bad idea. Maybe, but I got the idea from my therapist. So, this year alone, I've read 8 romance novels. I'm keeping up with my statistics on Storygraph. I use Goodreads to write funny clips. So today, I'm going to talk about 4 books and the lessons that I learned from each of them. Now here's the thing about romance, it's its own genre, which means it has its own genre conventions and it has its own little areas in a genre. Romance is a very broad category with a very long history. So I picked books that I know would appeal to my tastes, instead of just the most popular romance novels, as I lazily Googled top 10 romances of this year, and then wrote, I, a guy, tried 10 romance novels. Let's see what they're like. That's like me going and reading fantasy and picking freaking Game of Thrones, even though I wouldn't like anything about it. That's stupid. And I don't do stupid. That's a joke. I do stupid things. I'm not invincible. I'm not. So, in my hunt for romance novels, I picked romances with strong female protagonists and men that aren't annoying. I also was looking for romance novels where the men aren't aggressive. That is not to my taste. I can see why people would like it. I'm not a judgmental person. I can see why someone would like that. But I don't. It just reminds me of the real world way too much. And I have a very short temper with male protagonists of any shape, size, or form. But especially when I'm in a romance novel and I want to, feel like this woman should fall in love with him. I don't want to be rooting against the main couple. That's not fun. I would also like to say that for my purposes and for this video, I'm reading exclusively heterosexual romances, but that isn't to say that I don't have some sapphic romances that I've been reading and indulging in as well. I'm just not talking about them today because they weren't a part of my studies. The 2 authors I chose to read from were Kathrine and Abby Jimenez. Kathrine, I already read a book of hers that I really did adore, so I thought I'd try another one of her books. And then my therapist recommended me Abby Jimenez after describing what I don't and do like in romance novels. First off, let's start with The Out and Out, which is the first book I read, which is The Love Haters by Kathrine. This book stars Katie, who is a videographer who goes down to the Florida Keys to film a Coast Guard employee? I'm sorry, I just paused because I was like, what do you call a Coast Guard guy? A Coast Guard guy named Hutch, after his brother Cole sends her down there. Now, I don't consider it a spoiler to say that they end up together, because that's kind of a genre convention of a romance. Now, Katie, the protagonist, struggles with body image issues, and so a lot of the book is about her learning to cope and to deal with that. But I do think a lot of this book is about learning to let people love parts of yourself that you don't love, and letting them help you love yourself. And also letting people notice you and see you for who you are. Katie kind of starts off the book she wears very monochromatic colors, she doesn't want to be seen, she doesn't want to be known. And by the end of the book, she really has come into herself. One of her scenes with the love interest Hutch is he goes up to her and he says, you have a little pie of is it green or brown? He's like, you have a pie of a different color in your eye. Like in your eye, there's a different part of a color. And she goes, you know what? I have always noticed that about myself, but no one else has ever said anything. And oh my God, that had me squealing. Oh my God. That had me squealing. I love that so much. And the other thing that I did love is that Katie would always say he has this puppy dog frown when something frustrates him, and like Hutch isn't a very emotive guy. He's very chill, and I like that about him. And he doesn't smile often, but she notices that when he says something or something frustrates him or something confuses him, he has a puppy dog frown, and I can imagine the face. And it's just something like God, I can imagine it. And I adore it. That book really taught me about reinventing yourself and letting and loving yourself. But I do have to say, I object to either of the protagonists being called love haters, because they're like, oh, he hasn't dated for a year, he's a love hater. I'm like, what? If someone hasn't dated someone for a year, that doesn't make them a love hater, that just makes them single. Next, we have Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. This book is about, from the is about Katie, who's from this big, like, medical dynasty. She is an ER doctor. And while she is divorcing her husband, she meets this hip young guy named Daniel. Now, I was not a fan of that. I didn't like age gaps. I think they're really weird. It wasn't 10, I remember that. It wasn't 10, it was like 38 or something. Editing me put it in. I like this book because it had a lesson that wasn't even, like, about, like, romance. It was about, like, which I think is a lesson that, like, I need to internalize, which is you're allowed to break from this preset path, and that you don't have to, there's no one or the other. You can always make a new path for yourself. And that we can get stuck in these rigid ways of, like, it has to be this way, it has to be this way, my life has to be this way, I have to do this. And, like, I am a certified, like, I do that literally all the time. And I have very rigid thinking in that way. But I think this book really gave me, like, a new perspective on that. And I think that is something that a lot of people talk about, is how, like, when you have a dream for your future, and you just have this idea of my future has to be this way, it has to be this way, that it can be so hard, and you can end up self-sabotaging yourself. Alexis is from this medical dynasty. She just, like, thinks that, like, oh, like, I can't be with Daniel. Like, I just can't be with him. But, like, she can. And that's beautiful. Up next, we have the next book, which is Yours Truly. Now, this book actually got me thinking about a lot of things. And that's because this book, I think that, like, all those articles that those women are writing about, like, heterophailism and all this stuff about, like, oh, it feels embarrassing to date men nowadays. And I think this book, even though it didn't come out, like, at this time, I think it very much is, like, talking about that experience. There's this scene where the main protagonist, Brianna, is talking to her coworker, Jessica, who Jessica is in, like, an unhappy marriage, and she's an OBGYN, and she talks about how, being an OBGYN, she sees men treat their partners terribly every single day. Like, she sees it every single day, like, that's a part of her experience, and then she goes home and her husband treats her badly. And so, like, I'm thinking about this, and, like, I'm thinking to myself, like, wow, I really feel bad, like, for Jessica in this moment, like, her life really sucks. And then, like, so Brianna's like, yeah, I like hanging out with like, Jessica, like, this is making me feel better, like, I'm going through a divorce, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay. And Jessica's supposed to be, like, what we don't want, but, like, I want Jessica to have, like, a happy ending. I don't know. And she starts stating true facts, like, that men are more likely to leave their partner when they're terminally ill. Like, that's true. I don't know. I guess it is pessimistic, but, like, I'm not, like, I'm sorry, but sometimes, like, that's just the reality that we live in, and sometimes the world, like, sucks. And I feel like the book is kind of telling, like, Brianna, like, oh, like, she's kind of, like, wrong for this, or kind of, like, crazy for this, for, like, having, like, all these bad experiences with men. And then, like, that kind of affecting her future relationships. But I think it's also interesting how this book says that, like, yeah, like, misogyny, patriarchy, men treating you terribly can affect your future relationships with other men, even men who treat you kindly, because of how traumatizing that is, to always be treated as less than, treated as unworthy, as something that's disposable. And to be abused also makes you feel bad, and that can be a trauma in and of itself. The lesson I want to learn is that there are people who will love you despite all of that trauma, and will work through you, and will be with you through those traumas, even if it can be a little frustrating, even if it can be harder to have a relationship with somebody, that there's people who will work with you throughout that relationship. Romance truly is a genre that teaches us not just about each other, but ourselves, you know, what we like, what we don't like, how we approach relationships. So thank you guys for all watching the Zip Files. Like, subscribe, do all the things. And this channel is actually made for a school project for a class. So I want to thank you all for watching my videos, because it gave me much more to talk about in the final presentation I made. There's a lot more to talk about when you have actual analytics. So I hope you guys all have a good day. Love you. Bye.